I paid $10,000 for my sister's engagement party. $10,000. I wrote the check without flinching, told her not to worry about a thing, and made sure everything looked perfect. The venue, the flowers, even the champagne tower she'd been dreaming about since we were kids. I thought this would finally be the moment she looked at me not just as her older sister, but as someone she could count on. The day of the party came. The lights were strung across the courtyard, laughter filled the air, and I walked toward the entrance with my heart racing in anticipation. But when I reached the guest list at the door, my eyes scanned down the neat rows of names and froze. My hands started to shake. My name wasn't there. Not on the first page, not on the second. I flipped faster, panic rising in my throat, until I realized the truth. My sister had invited nearly everyone she knew, but she had deliberately erased me from the celebration I had paid for. That's the moment my heart turned cold, and I knew this story wasn't going to end the way she thought. The security guard at the entrance looked at me awkwardly, as if I had somehow wandered into the wrong event. He asked, "Are you sure you're on the list?" I wanted to laugh in his face, but nothing came out. Instead, I pulled out my phone and showed him the confirmation emails I had exchanged with the event planner. My credit card statement still had the $10,000 charge pending. "I paid for this entire night," I told him quietly, my voice shaking but steady enough to carry weight. He hesitated, then let me through, whispering an apology. I stepped into the glittering garden courtyard and watched guests in cocktail dresses and tailored suits, sipping champagne under strings of fairy lights. It was everything my sister had wanted, every little detail she'd described in our late-night phone calls, and yet she had erased me like I was a stranger. At first, I thought maybe it was a mistake, some oversight by the planner. But when I saw my sister across the lawn, radiant in her white dress, her hand clutched by her fiancé's, and her eyes landing on me with a flicker of irritation instead of joy, I knew it wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate. She hadn't wanted me here. She wanted my money, but not my presence. I stood near the edge of the crowd, my heels sinking slightly into the grass, trying to process the sting. A woman from her fiancé's family approached me, glass of rosé in hand, and said, "Oh, I didn't realize she had a sister." The words hit me harder than I expected. Not only had she hidden me from the guest list, she hadn't even told people I existed. I forced a smile, answered politely, then excused myself before my throat gave me away. I moved toward the bar, where the bartender already knew my name because I had coordinated the drink menu. He slid a glass toward me and whispered, "Rough night?" I nodded. He probably knew more about what was happening than half the guests. The speeches started around 9. My parents stood proudly beside my sister, glowing with pride, thanking everyone for being part of this special night for our family. Everyone except me. I noticed how their words carefully avoided any mention of the sister who had paid for everything. My father made a joke about how lucky they were to have such generous support from friends and future in-laws. My stomach twisted. It was like watching myself get erased in real time. Every dollar I had spent suddenly felt like a brick stacked on my chest, pressing harder with each round of applause. The breaking point came when they cut the cake. I had ordered that cake. I had picked the design, 3 tiers with delicate sugar roses cascading down the sides. I even knew the baker personally and had given her my sister's favorite flavors. As they sliced into it and fed each other bites to cheers from the crowd, my mother leaned into someone nearby and said, "We're so blessed she has everything she needs without asking anyone for help." The crowd clapped. The music swelled, and I realized with stunning clarity that they weren't going to give me a single ounce of recognition. I wasn't just excluded from the list, I was being erased from the narrative. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to beg. I was going to make sure they never forgot what they had done. I stayed quiet through the rest of the night, slipping between conversations, letting my sister believe she had succeeded in making me invisible. That silence, I realized, was my weapon. Every time someone raised a toast, I clinked my glass politely. Every time a guest asked where I'd come from, I smiled vaguely. I took mental snapshots of the entire scene. The way my sister clung to her fiancé like a prize. The way my parents beamed as if they had raised a flawless daughter. The way strangers laughed over champagne I had bought with money they pretended didn't exist. I watched my sister unwrap gifts in front of everyone, delicate boxes of jewelry, envelopes with cash, bottles of imported wine. She squealed over each one, thanking her guests like they had moved mountains for her. Meanwhile, I sat there knowing the truth. This entire night would not have happened without me. And she was determined to keep that truth buried. At one point, I caught my sister's eye across the table. Her smile faltered just for a second. She knew I had seen through it all. I thought about standing up right then, interrupting her little performance and announcing the truth, that her perfect night had been bought with my money, not theirs. But that would have given her exactly what she wanted, me looking desperate, bitter, dramatic. So I didn't. Instead, I waited, filing away every detail like evidence. After the guests drifted home and the fairy lights dimmed, I stayed behind under the excuse of helping the staff. My sister passed me on her way out, her heels clicking against the stone path, her fiancé's arm draped casually around her. She didn't thank me. She didn't even look at me. But she did pause for a moment, just long enough to whisper, "Don't make tonight about you." Then she walked away, leaving me standing there in the courtyard I had paid for. My chest burned, but my face stayed calm. That was the last straw. The next morning, while my sister basked in compliments on social media, I started my own plan. I still had every receipt, every invoice, every email. The florist, the caterer, the venue, they all had my name on their contracts. The payments had cleared from my account, not hers. And all of it, every dime, was traceable. She had erased me from the guest list, but she couldn't erase the paper trail. I contacted the event planner first. "From now on," I told her, "all communication about outstanding balances or follow-ups goes directly to me. No one else." She hesitated, then agreed, probably confused why the sister footing the bill had been treated like a ghost at her own party. Then I called the venue and confirmed the final invoice was closed under my card. Good. That meant if anything went wrong, any damages, any late fees, it would be traced back to me, and me alone. I wasn't going to let that stand. So I drafted a plan to make sure my sister felt the weight of what she had done, not with shouting or tears, but with consequences she couldn't avoid. By the end of that week, I had already contacted a lawyer. Not because I wanted to sue her, but because I wanted advice on how to structure what was essentially an unpaid loan. She accepted a service paid for by you under the understanding it was a gift. The lawyer asked. I nodded. Then technically it was a gift, she said. Unless you can prove otherwise. I smiled slowly and slid across the printouts of the text messages where my sister had promised to pay me back when she and her fiancé got settled. The lawyer's eyebrows lifted. That changes everything. It wasn't a gift. It was a debt. And now I was going to collect. My lawyer explained it step by step. Those messages were proof of an agreement. Even if it wasn't in formal contract language, the intent was clear. My sister acknowledged the money and promised repayment. That was enough to treat it as a binding debt. I left her office with a folder full of paperwork and a calm certainty building in my chest. For the first time, I didn't feel like the overlooked sister anymore. I felt like someone holding the strings. And my sister had no idea. The timing couldn't have been better. Just 2 weeks after the engagement party, my sister and her fiancé announced their wedding date. It was going to be in the same venue, even more extravagant, and they were already hinting that family would pitch in again. My parents gushed about how beautiful it would be, and I watched silently, sipping my coffee, as they all spoke as if I were invisible. But I wasn't invisible. I was documenting every word. When the first vendor reached out about deposits, I stepped in before my sister could. "This is Kelly," I said firmly on the phone, "and I will not be responsible for any charges related to that wedding. Put everything in her name. She is the client, not me." The silence on the other end told me they were used to hearing my name on all the bills. Not anymore. This time, the invoices would land exactly where they belonged. Predictably, my sister found out within a day. She stormed into my apartment, slamming the door without knocking. "Why are vendors calling me?" she demanded, her eyes flashing. "You've always handled this stuff." I kept my face neutral and slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were copies of the engagement party invoices, the bank statements, and our text messages. She scanned them, her lips parting as the realization hit. "What is this?" she whispered. "It's a record," I said calmly. "You owe me $10,000, and until that's settled, I won't be financing another cent of your wedding. You wanted me erased from your party? Fine. Consider me erased from your budget, too." She laughed bitterly, trying to recover her confidence. "You're my sister. Families don't keep score." I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. Families also don't erase each other from guest lists. Families don't humiliate the one person who made their night possible. So if you want to play family, we can. But this, I tapped the stack of papers. This is business. And business means repayment. For the first time, I saw fear flash across her face. She tried to pivot, tried to guilt-trip me, saying things like, "You'll ruin my reputation," and "People will think I'm selfish." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I simply repeated the terms. $10,000. Due before the wedding. Or every vendor gets a copy of this folder, and every guest who clapped for your perfect night will find out who really paid for it. She left shaking, and I knew I had finally broken through the performance. My parents called me later, voices dripping with accusation, telling me I was tearing the family apart and acting out of jealousy. I didn't argue. I let them rant, let them throw their familiar lines about sacrifice and loyalty. But this time I didn't bend. "I am not your safety net," I said simply, and ended the call. That night, I opened my laptop and began drafting a simple repayment agreement for my sister to sign. The lawyer had already prepared it. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about boundaries, proof, and control. I was tired of being erased. If they wanted to pretend I didn't exist, fine. But they would not take my silence for weakness again. Days passed without a word from my sister. I thought maybe she was stalling, trying to see if I would crack under pressure. But I didn't. Instead, I started preparing for both outcomes, repayment or exposure. I emailed copies of the agreement to myself, stored screenshots of the text messages on a hard drive, and even drafted a letter addressed to her fiancé's parents. Not because I wanted to humiliate her, but because I wanted her to know I could and would if she forced my hand. The first crack showed during a family dinner. She and her fiancé walked in late, holding hands, smiling for the table like a staged photograph. But when our eyes met, hers dropped quickly to her plate. My mother fussed over her, serving extra portions, while my father bragged about the upcoming wedding plans. I stayed quiet until my father turned to me and said, "Kelly, you'll handle the rehearsal dinner, right?" It wasn't a question, it was an expectation. I set my fork down, folded my hands neatly, and said, "No." The word landed like a stone in the middle of the table. The room fell silent, forks paused halfway to mouths. My father frowned. "Excuse me?" "No," I repeated, my voice calm. "I'm not financing anything further until my sister settles her debt with me. $10,000. Once that's paid, we can discuss anything else. Until then, I'm not involved." My sister's fiancé shifted uncomfortably, glancing at her, and I saw it, the first spark of doubt in his eyes. He hadn't known. She hadn't told him the truth. My sister tried to laugh it off, calling me dramatic, saying I was exaggerating. But I cut her short. "Would you like me to pull up the receipts?" I asked, already reaching for my phone. Her face flushed crimson and she hissed, "Not here." But the damage was done. Her fiancé leaned in, murmuring something sharp under his breath. For the rest of the meal, she barely touched her food, her perfect smile cracking at the edges. I stayed quiet, but inside, I knew the balance had shifted. 2 days later, I got a message from her. "Can we meet?" Alone. I agreed, and we sat across from each other at a cafe, steam rising from untouched cups of coffee. She looked smaller without the crowd around her, without the spotlight she so carefully curated. I don't have 10,000, she admitted finally. Not yet. That's not my problem, I said softly. You chose to erase me. You chose to pretend my money didn't exist. Now you can face the reality that it does. She begged for more time, promised she'd pay me after the wedding gifts came in, after her fiancé's bonus cleared, after anything but now. I shook my head. Sign the agreement. Put it in writing. Otherwise this doesn't go away, she signed. Hand trembling, lips pressed tight, but she signed. And in that moment, I realized the revenge wasn't about money anymore. It was about watching her acknowledge me, the sister she had tried to erase, as the one person who could unravel her perfect image. When I left the cafe, the sky was heavy with rain clouds and I felt lighter than I had in years. For once, I wasn't the quiet supporter, the invisible sibling. I was the line she couldn't cross. And she knew it. After my sister signed the agreement, I expected silence. But what I didn't expect was how quickly the ripples would spread. Her fiancé found out the truth within days. He called me directly, voice low, controlled, but edged with frustration. Why didn't she tell me? He asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I forwarded him the receipts, the messages, everything. Because she didn't want anyone to know where the money came from, I finally said. He exhaled sharply, muttered a strained thank you, and hung up. The very next day, my parents showed up at my door, furious. My mother's eyes were sharp as glass. How dare you involve outsiders in family matters, she snapped. My father added, You've embarrassed us. Do you realize what people are saying? I stood in my living room, arms folded, and for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink. I didn't embarrass you, I said evenly. She did, by taking my money and pretending I didn't exist. All I did was stop letting her erase me. They ranted about loyalty, about blood, about how I was supposed to support without conditions. I let them talk. Then I walked them to the door and said, I will not finance a family that pretends I don't exist. If that means you cut me out, so be it. My father glared at me. My mother gasped like I'd slapped her, but I shut the door calmly. And for the first time, the silence felt like freedom, not exile. A week later, whispers started spreading through her circle. Vendors were cautious now, asking for deposits directly from her instead of assuming I'd cover the gaps. She scrambled, trying to juggle appearances, making excuses about miscommunication. But the truth has a way of leaking, even through cracks she thought she sealed. I got a call from one of her bridesmaids, someone I barely knew. Is it true you paid for the entire engagement party? She asked. I didn't answer directly. I just said, I have the receipts. That was enough. By the next day, the whispers weren't whispers anymore. Her fiancé's parents invited me to lunch, something they had never done before. I sat across from them, polite, collected, while they asked careful questions about what had really happened. I didn't embellish. I simply explained how I had paid, how I was erased, how I had to secure repayment. They listened quietly. Then the father nodded slowly. We appreciate your honesty. That was all he said. But the weight behind his tone told me everything. My sister's perfect facade was cracking where it mattered most. Meanwhile, my sister tried everything, pleading texts, angry voicemails, even a public post online about how some people can't let others be happy. I didn't respond. Every attempt she made to paint me as jealous only reminded people she had something to hide. And when her fiancé confronted her in front of their families about the debt, the entire performance collapsed. I wasn't there, but I heard later from a cousin. She broke down, admitting it through clenched teeth, while he looked at her with a mixture of disappointment and disgust. That night, she called me sobbing, accusing me of ruining her life. I held the phone away, letting her words spill like acid, and when she paused for breath, I answered simply, I didn't ruin anything. You did. All I did was stop letting you use me. Then I hung up. For the first time, I felt the shift completely. The girl who had erased me was now fighting to prove she wasn't the one erased. And she knew, deep down, that her fall was of her own making. The wedding planning unraveled faster than I imagined. My sister had signed the repayment agreement, but signing didn't mean paying. and the pressure was eating at her from every direction. Vendors began refusing to move forward without deposits in her own name. Her fiancé, who had once looked at her like she could do no wrong, now kept his eyes sharp on every bill. I could tell he was starting to piece together a picture of a woman who lived on appearances paid for by someone else. And my parents? They called constantly, their voices cracking between anger and desperation, begging me to drop this nonsense before the wedding. But I didn't bend. Every time they pleaded, I repeated the same line. She owes me $10,000. Nothing moves until that's settled. The tension boiled over one night when my sister showed up at my apartment again. She wasn't polished this time. Her hair was unbrushed, her makeup streaked from crying, her perfect composure shattered. She slammed the repayment agreement on my table. "You've destroyed me," she spat. "Everyone thinks I'm a liar." I didn't flinch. "You are a liar," I said quietly. "And this," I tapped the paper, "is proof." She tried to twist it, tried to claim I had manipulated her, but her voice cracked under the weight of her own guilt. She wasn't fighting me anymore. She was fighting herself. Within days, her fiancé's family intervened. They scheduled a meeting at their house, invited both sides of the family, and laid everything out in the open. I sat there with my folder, calm, while my sister squirmed in her chair. When they asked for clarification, I presented the receipts, the emails, the texts. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't embellish. I just showed the truth. My sister tried to interrupt, to paint me as dramatic, jealous, bitter. But each time she opened her mouth, another piece of evidence silenced her. By the time I finished, the room was heavy with shame, and none of it belonged to me. Her fiancé looked at her differently after that meeting. Not with love, not with admiration, but with calculation. He saw her as a liability. My parents sat stiff, their eyes darting anywhere but me, realizing they couldn't protect her from this. For the first time, I wasn't the scapegoat. I was the one with power, and they all knew it. The weeks that followed were filled with quiet fallout. Vendors started dropping her bookings one by one, unwilling to risk unpaid balances. Friends pulled away, whispers following her wherever she went. And every time she posted online, her captions about blessed love were met with comments she couldn't delete fast enough. "Didn't your sister pay for that? Are you ever going to pay her back?" Her polished image cracked, and the more she tried to patch it, the wider the cracks spread. I didn't gloat publicly. I didn't need to. I just lived my life steady, unbothered, while she scrambled to hold together the shards of hers. And the more silent I stayed, the more her world spun out of control. The final blow came from her fiancé. A month before the wedding, he called it off. Not with drama, not with yelling, but with a single, sharp statement. "If you can lie to your own sister, you'll lie to me." And with that, he walked away, leaving her with deposits lost, vendors unpaid, and a reputation in tatters. She tried to blame me. Of course she did. But deep down she knew. I didn't destroy her. I simply stopped carrying her. And without me, she had nothing to stand on. After the fiancé ended things, my sister's life went into free fall. The deposits she had placed were non-refundable, and vendors whispered about her behind closed doors, warning others not to deal with her. Friends she once flaunted began keeping their distance. Nobody wanted to be dragged into her chaos. My parents tried to salvage her reputation, insisting to relatives that it was all a misunderstanding. But those words rang hollow when everyone already knew the truth. I had stayed quiet in public, but silence is often louder than shouting. It made people wonder, and every rumor filled in the blanks she couldn't control. The strange part was how quickly people started turning toward me. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years sent messages saying they admired how I stood my ground. One even admitted, "We all saw how your family treated you, but you never broke. You finally made them see it." I didn't respond with gloating. I simply thanked them. Revenge wasn't about spectacle anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity piece by piece. My sister, meanwhile, spiraled. She called me late at night, crying into the phone, sometimes apologizing, sometimes screaming, often both in the same breath. I listened once or twice, but I never gave her what she wanted. I didn't rush to comfort her. I didn't absolve her. I let her sit in the silence of consequences she had created. Eventually, I stopped answering altogether. She wanted me erased? Fine, I could disappear, but this time on my terms, not hers. What surprised me most was how my parents shifted. At first, they attacked me, called me cold, accused me of destroying the family. But as weeks passed and the truth settled into the bones of our relatives, they grew quieter. My father stopped lecturing. My mother avoided the subject altogether. And slowly, their calls shifted tone, from angry demands to careful invitations. "Maybe you could come to dinner," my mother said once, her voice softer than I'd ever heard. I knew what it meant. They had realized the power had flipped. They couldn't scold me back into submission anymore. They could only try to keep me close before they lost me completely. I didn't rush to accept. Instead, I sat with that power, with the clarity of knowing that the girl who erased me had destroyed herself, and the parents who once overlooked me were now the ones seeking my approval. I had turned the balance upside down, not with screaming or fighting, but with evidence, patience, and boundaries they couldn't bend. The wedding that was supposed to crown my sister as the golden child never happened. Instead, she moved back into my parents' house, sulking in her childhood room, stripped of the image she had tried so hard to build. And me? I walked away lighter, freer, knowing that sometimes the sharpest revenge is not fire or fury, it's truth, held steady until it forces everyone else to look straight at it. The silence after the canceled wedding stretched for months, but it was the kind of silence that weighed on every room my sister entered. People avoided asking questions, but everyone knew. Whenever she walked into family gatherings, conversations shifted awkwardly, eyes slid away, and the air thickened. For once, I wasn't the one shrinking under that silence. She was, and she hated it. I could see it in the way she forced smiles, laughed too loudly, overcompensated with stories that no one truly believed. She was trying to claw her way back to the pedestal she'd once had, but it was gone. And everyone knew why. I didn't flaunt my victory. I didn't need to. I lived quietly, kept working, building my own life. And oddly enough, my parents began leaning on me more, not financially, but emotionally. They invited me to dinners, asked about my work, even listened without interrupting. It was surreal, after years of being the invisible one, to watch them finally realize where their loyalty should have been all along. It wasn't about them suddenly becoming better people. It was about them finally seeing the cost of the favoritism they had protected for so long. My sister had crumbled under it while I had survived. The moment I knew the shift was permanent came one afternoon when my father asked me to help him with paperwork for their house. He handed me the folder explaining updates to the estate, and I noticed something. My name was there, officially, clearly, listed where it had never been before. My sister's name was still there too, but the balance had changed. I wasn't the afterthought anymore. I was recognized. That one document spoke louder than any apology my parents could have given me. As for my sister, she tried to reach out less and less. Maybe because every time she saw me, she was reminded of the night she tried to erase me and ended up erasing herself. Once she muttered an apology over coffee, voice brittle, eyes downcast. I didn't rush to accept. I just nodded and let the silence sit between us. Some wounds don't need dramatic closure. They just need distance. Looking back, I realized the revenge wasn't about money or even the humiliation. It was about making her face the truth she spent her whole life hiding. That she wasn't untouchable, that her actions had consequences, and that the sister she thought she could erase was the one person who refused to disappear. And in that realization, I finally found peace. Not because she suffered, but because I no longer did. Months turned into nearly a year, and the story of my sister's canceled wedding became less of a scandal and more of a quiet legend whispered at family gatherings. People didn't talk about it openly anymore, but the memory sat heavy in the air whenever her name came up. She faded, bit by bit, her once perfect image dimming as friends drifted away, as invitations stopped coming. as relatives stopped praising her. And every time she looked at me, I could see it. That unspoken acknowledgement that she had built her tower on my shoulders, and once I stepped away, it collapsed. She couldn't undo that. I carried on. My life wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Steady, honest, untangled from her chaos. My parents slowly adjusted to the new balance. They no longer asked me to sacrifice silently. Instead, they began consulting me, involving me, respecting me in ways they never had before. It wasn't love suddenly rewritten, it was recognition. And recognition, after decades of being invisible, was enough. The final piece of closure came when my sister mailed me a check. No note, no apology, just $10,000 in my name. The repayment agreement had finally come full circle. I stood in my kitchen holding it, the paper trembling slightly in my hand. And I laughed, not because I needed the money, but because it symbolized everything she had tried to erase, now forced into black ink and undeniable truth. She had to acknowledge me, even if it was silent, even if it burned her pride to ash. I didn't rush to deposit it. I left it on my desk for weeks, a reminder that revenge doesn't always arrive in fireworks. It can be quiet, patient, written on a single piece of paper that says, "You can't erase me." Eventually, I cashed it, not with bitterness, but with a calm sense of finality. The debt was closed. But the memory would never be. And as I sat back, looking at the life I had built apart from her shadow, I realized the most important part. My revenge wasn't her downfall. My revenge was stepping out of the role she and my parents had written for me and refusing to ever go back. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I documented, I waited, I drew boundaries, and I let her undo herself. And that, in the end, was enough. Family is supposed to lift you up, not erase you. The moment they try to write you out of the story, you get to choose whether you stay erased, or whether you write yourself back in with ink that can't be ignored. Life has a strange way of settling after storms. For the first time in years, I felt like I was walking through my days without a weight strapped to my chest. I went to work, I made plans with friends, I traveled when I wanted to, and no one was siphoning my energy or my money behind the scenes. The freedom was subtle but powerful, like taking a deep breath after years of holding it in. My sister, meanwhile, lived in the aftermath of choices she had made. She still tried to curate an image online, but the likes had dwindled, the comments thinned, and the audience she once relied on had learned to see through her. People don't forget the smell of smoke after a fire, and she carried that with her now. Sometimes I caught myself wondering if she ever truly understood what she had done, or if she only regretted the consequences. I never asked and she never said. What mattered wasn't her recognition, it was mine. I had recognized my own worth, my own boundaries, and once I did, there was no going back. Even my parents sensed it. They tread more carefully now, choosing their words, respecting my time. I wasn't the scapegoat, the automatic fixer, the invisible safety net. I was someone they couldn't afford to lose. That shift was quiet, but it was permanent. The repayment check sat on my desk until I finally deposited it, and even then, I didn't celebrate. It wasn't about the money. It was about what the money represented. Proof that I had been erased and proof that I had written myself back in. Proof that my sister, for all her bravado, had been forced to acknowledge me in the most concrete way possible. That acknowledgement was worth more than the $10,000. It was priceless. What struck me most in the months that followed was how people looked at me differently. Not in a dramatic spotlight way, but in a subtle shift of respect. Cousins who once brushed me off now sought my opinion. Family friends who had always praised my sister began including me in conversations, asking about my projects, complimenting my independence. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about recognition. The thing I had craved, not applause, not glory, but simple recognition of my place, of my existence, of my worth. And the sweetest part of all? I didn't have to destroy anyone to get it. I just had to step back and let the truth do its work. My sister destroyed herself with lies and entitlement. My parents exposed their own favoritism by defending her too long. All I had to do was stop carrying the burden they shoved onto me. Revenge didn't come from fire or fury. It came from quiet boundaries and the patience to let people face their own reflection. Even now, when I think back to that night, standing at the entrance of the engagement party, staring at the guest list where my name didn't exist, I smile. Because that was the night I stopped letting them define me. That was the night I stopped begging to be included. That was the night I realized erasing me wasn't their victory. It was their mistake. When I think about everything that happened, the part that still lingers isn't the night of the engagement party itself. It's the weeks and months that followed, when the people who had always assumed I would be silent finally realized that silence was no longer the same thing as submission. For years I had played the role they gave me, the reliable sister, the invisible daughter, the one who made things happen but never asked for credit. They thought I would stay in that place forever, content to fund their dreams while erasing myself from the picture. But what they never understood is that the longer you push someone into the shadows, the sharper their eyes become. I saw everything. I remembered everything. And when the time came, I had all the proof I needed to step back into the light on my own terms. The $10,000 became a symbol of so much more than money. It represented every quiet betrayal, every moment where I was treated like a supporting character in my sister's story. She thought she could cash in my loyalty without ever paying the price. But she forgot that debts don't disappear just because you pretend they don't exist. In the end, that check she mailed me was more than repayment. It was her confession. Without words, without an audience, she admitted the truth she had fought so hard to bury. I mattered. I always had. She had just chosen to deny it until the evidence was undeniable, and the fallout wasn't just hers. My parents, who once believed favoritism was harmless, were forced to confront the wreckage it created. They had spent years shielding her, praising her, excusing her, while expecting me to sacrifice quietly. When the truth came out, their golden child was tarnished, and the daughter they had overlooked was the one standing steady. That shift was painful for them, but it was necessary. Because favoritism doesn't just damage the child who is ignored, it corrodes the one who is placed on the pedestal too. My sister's downfall wasn't just her doing. It was built on the years of imbalance my parents created, and when it collapsed, we all had to live with the pieces. For me, though, the collapse became liberation. I stopped answering calls that drained me. I stopped explaining myself to people who didn't want to hear. I stopped carrying a family that was never willing to carry me. In doing so, I discovered something I should have known long ago. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, methodical. It's waiting for the lies to suffocate themselves while you stand calmly with the truth in your hands. It's learning that you don't need to scream to be heard. You just need to stop whispering and let silence speak for you. Now, when I walk into a family gathering, no one forgets my name. I don't need to fight for a seat at the table. My presence is acknowledged, my voice carries weight, and my parents tread carefully where they once dismissed me. That change didn't come from begging or pleading. It came from boundaries. It came from proof. It came from me refusing to be erased ever again. And as for my sister, she still lives in the shadow of her own choices. Maybe one day she'll rebuild her life in a healthier way. Or maybe she'll keep chasing an image that no longer convinces anyone. That's her journey, not mine. I no longer carry her weight. I no longer pay her debts. I no longer let her decide who I am. That freedom, that peace, is the truest revenge I could have asked for. Because in the end, she thought the cruelest thing she could do was erase me from her story. But what she never understood is that the cruelest thing you can do to yourself is erase the very person who kept you standing. She erased me and in doing so erased her own foundation. I survived. She crumbled. And I never had to lift a hand. So now I ask you, the women listening to this, if your sister, your parents, or your family tried to erase you, would you have done what I did? Would you hold your silence until the truth spoke louder than their lies? Or would you let them write you out of the story without a fight?